In my therapy practice, I work with couples and they come in often kind of stuck in this dynamic where they really both want to heal things, but they're so hurt by the other and so protective of themselves that they're kind of in this place of fight or flight, you know, and their brains are locked down. They can't think creatively, and they can only react. And those reactions tend to land in a way that's either attacking or withdrawing. And then the other person reacts back. And you end up with this kind of reactivity that goes back and forth. And tragically, it pushes them further apart from each other rather than enabling them to heal and come together. We call that the distress cycle. And then over time, what happens is that the people caught in that script start to feel a sense of hopelessness. They start to feel like, we know where this goes. We know how this script ends, and yet I don't have another move I can make. I don't have an option that disrupts that and that helps us move to a different place. And that feels hopeless and deeply sad. We want peace, we want respect, but instead what we get from each other is fear, hurt, and pain. And I've really been thinking about that because I have to say that the situation we're witnessing right now in Israel and Palestine feels very much like a distress cycle writ large. They're stuck in a pattern of reactivity, and neither side feels like they have another option, another move that they can make. And the sad thing is that on both sides, civilians, majorities, vast majorities, want peace. They want coexistence. They want a two-state solution that is respectful of both states. And yet, the reactivity that they fall into, that fight or flight response, which is so understandable when you feel attacked or you are attacked, pushes them further and further away from each other. And yet, as with couples, peacemaking requires vulnerability. You have to be able to risk trust of the other in order to find a way to peace. And every time you look at the history of this conflict, every time the sides have approached that place, have gotten to the brink of a solution that could work, fear takes over. More often than not, because some extremist does something to blow it all up. Somebody assassinates, an Israeli extremist assassinates Yitzhak Rabin, for example, or Arafat is unable to push himself to really lead his people into a deal that they could have had. And then they're right back at it. And that's what we are seeing right now. An unconscionable, inexcusable terrorist attack victimizes Israelis. And then Israel's disproportionate response victimizes Palestinians, and reactivity reigns. And it's so tragic, it's so heartbreaking. I've spoken with people I know and love on both sides of this conflict who have connections to both sides of this conflict. And it's just excruciating. Now, I want to say that I realize that this way of looking at this problem is overly reductive. Nations are not people, and there are only certain ways you could argue that Israel and Palestine are married and or stuck together. And I'm certainly not taking a position on who started it or who has done more damage to whom. Those are arguments that we can have, but that's not my point today. My point today is this dynamic, this process, this pattern that the system gets stuck in. And it feels hopeless to both sides. They feel trapped in a script that everybody knows where it leads, but there's no better move to make. Well, the dynamic in our gospel today is very different from that in a lot of ways, but Jesus's opponents are also trying to trap him in a script that has no good options. See, what's happening is the Pharisees and Herodians come together and they want to trap Jesus with a question. And the question is it lawful to pay taxes? And this is a trick question because if Jesus says, yes, it's lawful, you should pay your taxes, he's undermining the core of his message, which is that we owe our allegiance only to God, not to Caesar, not to Rome, the oppressive state in this case. So he can't say yes, or that undermines the movement. But if he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes, they've caught him being unfaithful to the state, being subversive. And then he can get arrested for that. So he has no good answer to this yes or no question. And the way they catch him, and so what he says is quite brilliant. He says to them, well, bring me a coin. And they bring him a denarius, which is worth a full day's labor by a day laborer. And in forcing them to hand him a coin, he's already making a point. I don't have this money that is due to Rome, the taxes that Rome collects. You do, right? You have the coin. I need to ask you to bring it to me. And then they hand him the coin and he says, well, whose head is on here? It's Caesar. And we know that coins in this era, some of them at least, said Caesar Augustus, son of God in Greek. So it announces a kind of idolatry. Who has the coin and what is on the coin? Not God, but Caesar. And then he sort of has this brilliant way of just moving between the two options they're trying to stick him with and saying, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. And when I think about it, I think like if I had been in those shoes, I would have started freaking out. Oh my gosh, I'm trapped. I don't know how to answer this. And I would have gone into that fight or flight place, right? I am not safe here. It's so hard to think creatively in this place. And what Jesus does is he steps back and he's creative in his answer. And his answer makes very powerful political points without saying anything that could be read as transgressive. And he steers this middle way, as we like to say in the Anglican Church, between the two no good answers they want him to answer. And there's another piece of this reading today that particularly jumped out at me as I thought about our international situation and in the Holy Land. His opponents say to him, we know that you are a man of God because you show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. And to me, that's a reminder that the kingdom Jesus is inaugurating is a kingdom where everybody counts. He so often provides his ministry to people outside his group of Jews, right? The Roman centurion, the Samaritan woman. Everybody counts. Every life is sacred. There is neither Israeli nor Palestinian, Jew nor Christian nor Muslim, but all are one in God's eyes, to borrow from Paul. And so I don't have answers, to this terrible unfolding trauma and tragedy in the Middle East. But I can tell you that this is what I'm praying for. That people find the courage to not repeat the old pattern, to not allow their rage and their grief and their anxiety to stick them in this same cycle. As I speak, Israel has amassed troops on Gaza's border. What would it be like if instead of doing the thing everyone expects, they step back from the brink and do something different? What would it be like if instead of punishing an entire population to get at their enemies, they turn the water and electricity back on and let the aid flow in? And on the other side, other players can make new moves. Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestinians. What would it be like if they stopped calling for the eradication of Israel as a state? What would it be like if they and their allies stopped framing terrorism as acts of resistance to oppression? What would it be like if both sides were able to raise up leaders with the courage to be real partners for peace? We need new moves in this pattern of violence. We need to hold every life as sacred to God. We need leaders and followers willing to exercise restraint, willing to step back from reactivity and choose a middle way, as Jesus chooses a middle way in our reading today, showing partiality for none. We need leaders and people willing to get vulnerable in their quest for peace. So may it be. Amen.